Okay, so let's just rip the Band-Aid off this one. I was looking through the research packet for this deep dive today, and I saw the title of the main folder. And I really have to say, if you are terminally online like I am, or even just casually scrolling through Twitter or TikTok, seeing the word gooning as a serious macroeconomic concept is, well, it's a lot to process.
Yeah, it is. It's certainly a term that carries a whole lot of baggage.
But Craig did just putting it really lightly. I mean, it's internet slang, right? It's a meme. It's usually reserved for the absolute darkest, stickiest corners of the web. And yet here we are about to spend the next hour talking about it in the very real context of global business strategy and neuroscience.
It is extremely jarring. I completely agree. But that shock value is actually part of why the source material uses it so effectively. I think it grabs you. But we really need to look past the meme for a second and understand the actual mechanical definition of the word, because that underlying mechanics is what this entire deep dive is built on today.
Right, exactly. So for the uninitiated out there, and honestly, consider yourself lucky if you are, let's just define the term in its native habitat, I guess, before we apply it to everything else. In the world of internet pornography, addiction, gooning, isn't just watching a video. It's a very specific practice.
Correct. It refers to a state of prolonged, almost trance-like arousal. The participant or the gooner intentionally delays their gratification. They bring themselves to the edge of completion, but they stop over and over again. The goal isn't the finish line at all. The goal is to maintain that high dopamine state of almost for as long as possible, sometimes for hours.
It's the edge. It's maximizing the wanting while strictly prohibiting the having.
Precisely. It is a physiological loop where the brain is basically marinated in desire but entirely denied the release that would end that desire. And this right here is the major pivot point. Our source material for today argues that this specific loop, this addictive trance, has completely escaped the confines of adult website. It has been weaponized, sanitized, and deployed by the world's largest industries.
And this was the huge aha moment for me reading through the doc. The idea that gooning is no longer about sex. It's about a business model. We're seeing this exact gooner logic applied to social media, to the food on our grocery shelf, and most aggressively to the video.
The source actually calls it engineered dissatisfaction. Think about it from a corporate perspective. If you are a business, satisfaction is actually a massive problem. If a customer is satisfied, they stop consuming your product. If you eat a meal and feel full-archy, you stop eating. If you play a game, beat the boss, and feel a sense of closure, you put the controller down.
And in a modern engagement economy, putting the controller down is basically death for these companies.
Exactly. So the explicit goal of modern industry is to keep you in that goons, a state of perpetual low-level arousal and anticipation, where you are never quite full, never quite done, and never quite happy, scrolling.
The doom scroll. I mean, we've all been there, right? It's 11 at night, you lay down in bed, you open TikTok or Instagram Reels or whatever your poison happens to be. You tell yourself, I will literally just watch a couple of clips to unwind. Next thing you know, it's 1 a.m, your eyes are completely dry, your phone battery's at 4%, and you just feel terrible.
That right there is the addictive trance. The source describes this stage 1 gooner phenomenon perfect. It's that total amnesia. You watch hundreds of short videos, half-naked girls dancing, cooking clips, car crashes. But if I walked into the room and asked you 5 minutes later to name 3 things you just saw, you couldn't do it.
No, it's just a complete blur.
Because you weren't actually engaging with the content. You were being harvested. The source argues that this feeling, that drained, foggy, guilty feeling you get after a massive scrolling session, is absolutely not an accident. It is the direct result of a deliberate design philosophy aimed at bypassing your executive function entirely.
The source used a phrase that really stuck with me. They called it turning people into degenerates for profit.
It's very aggressive language, but the economics completely support it. The source argues that these major tech and gaming industries view your willpower as a barrier to their quarterly revenue. So what do? They hire armies of neuroscientists and behavioral psychologists to systematically break that barrier down.
So that is our core mission today. We're going to take this whole concept apart bolt by bolt. We're going to look at first the actual neuroscience of dopamine and uncertainty. Then we are going to do a very deep dive into the video game industry, specifically because the source argues that modern gaming is basically gooning the interactive.
Yes, we will look closely at the dark patterns they employ, like loot boxes, battle passes, and the total destruction of narrative logic in modern games.
We will also look at a specific case study of a fallen giant, Square Enix, and why the source thinks Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is the ultimate example of this industry rot. But it's not all doom and gloom here. We actually do have an antidote.
Right, the game Expedition 33, a title that the source boldly claims is the anti-gooner game.
And finally, we are going to talk about how you can actually break this trance in your own life. And I have to say, I was pretty skeptical about some of the practical advice, specifically the part about literally cleaning your bed. But the biological argument the source makes there is surprisingly compelling.
It connects directly back to systemic inflammation and brain function. Really fascinating stuff.
All right, so let's get into the machinery of this thing. The source starts with the brain. And I think most people, myself included, have a very pop science understanding of dopamine. We tend to think of it as the pleasure chemical. You eat a chocolate chip cookie, you get a hit of dopamine.
That is the common cultural narrative.
Yeah.
But it's fundamentally incorrect.
Yeah.
And understanding this specific correction is the absolute key to understanding how you are being manipulated every day. Dopamine is not the molecule of pleasure. It is the molecule of anticipation.
So it's not the feeling of actually eating the cookie. It's the feeling of seeing the cookie on the counter and knowing you are about.
Exactly right. It is the craving. It is the raw drive that pushes you to seek out the reward.
Yeah.
Once you actually bite into the cookie and get the reward, your dopamine levels immediately drop. Actual pleasure is mediated by entirely different chemical systems in the brain, like opioids or endocannabinoid. Dopamine is just the voice in your head saying, I want.
Which perfectly explains why the gooning model works so efficiently. If dopamine is just then the best spike someone's dopamine, give them one. It's to keep them waiting.
To keep them forever in the chase. And to truly understand how to maximize that chase, the source takes us all the way back to the 1950s and the foundational work of psychology.
The famous pigeon experiments. I remember learning about this in Psych 101 back in college, but the source goes into serious detail on why this specific mechanical setup is so unpowered.
All right, so let's picture a Skinner box. It's a small control cage with a little button and a food dispenser. You put a very hungry pigeon inside. Skinner tries a few different programming setups for the button. First, he tries what's called a fixed ratio schedule. Every single time the pigeon pecks the button, it gets a food pellet. Peck food.
So the pigeon learns the rules pretty quickly. It's a straightforward transaction.
Exactly. The pigeon pecks when it feels hungry, it eats the pellet, and then it stops pecking. Physically satisfied, it goes to a corner and goes. There is absolutely no obsession. But then Skinner decides to change the rules of the box. He introduces the variable reward schedule.
And this is the absolute game changer.
Yes. Now, when the pigeon pecks the button, maybe it gets a pellet. Maybe it doesn't get anything. Maybe it has to peck 5 times in a row. Maybe 20 times. Maybe just one. The outcome is completely random and unpredictable.
And the pigeon just completely loses its mind, right?
Completely. The pigeon starts pecking the button incessantly. It doesn't stop to sleep. It doesn't even stop when it's physically full. It becomes entirely obsessed with the mechanism of the button itself. Why? Because of a concept neuroscientists call prediction error. When your brain doesn't know if the reward is coming or not, it spikes dopamine to its maximum possible levels to force you to keep trying. The uncertainty itself becomes the drug.
And the source draws a straight, solid line from that frantic pigeon in the box to the modern slot machine.
The slot machine is arguably the most perfect implementation of the Skinner box ever created for human beings. You pull the heavy lever. The bright wheels spin. That specific spinning time, that few seconds of waiting, that is the massive dopamine spike. You're anticipating, you're thinking, will I win this time? Most of the time, of course, you lose. But that intermittent reinforcement, that one occasional random win, keeps you completely glued to that chair for hours on end.
And the scary part is now we don't even need to drive to a casino to get that hit. We have the exact same slot machine sitting in our pocket all day. The source argues that the swipe-up mechanic on social media is mechanically identical to slot mover.
Just think about the physical motion for a second. You drag your thumb down the screen and release it. The screen actually spins a little loading wheel for a split second, and then boom, a brand new video appears. You have absolutely no idea what it's going to be.
It could be a boring ad for car insurance. It could be someone doing a stupid dance. Or it could be that perfect video. The one that actually makes you laugh out loud, or the one with the insanely attractive person that catches your eye. The thirst trap, as the source explicitly calls it.
That thirst trap, or that perfect joke, is the jackpot. And because you fundamentally don't know when that jackpot is going to show up on your screen, you just keep swiping. You tell yourself just one more. Maybe the next one is the really good one. You are literally the pigeon pecking the button, hoping for the food pellet. The algorithm is meticulously designed to withhold the good content just enough to keep you starving, but sprinkle it in just frequently enough to keep you from closing the app.
It's honestly terrifying when you sit back and realize that your daily behavior is that programmable by an app. But the source points out this isn't just a Silicon Valley tech thing at all. There was a detail in the packet about the food industry that I found genuinely disturbing to read.
The big tobacco connection.
Yeah, exactly. The source claims that the exact same massive conglomerates that owned big tobacco companies like Philip Morris and R.J. Reynolds started aggressively buying up American food companies in the 80s and 90s, specifically ultra-processed food companies. We're talking Kraft, General Foods, Nabisco.
And the crucial part is they didn't just buy them as passive financial investments. They actively transferred their proprietary technology and research. They took the exact same rogue scientists who had spent decades figuring out how to make nicotine paper as chemically addictive as possible, and they told them to do the exact same thing with potato chips and cookies.
The creation of what they call hyper-palatable foods.
Right. They literally engineered the food at a molecular level to hit what industry insiders called the bliss point. It is the mathematically perfect ratio of salt, sugar, and fat that completely overrides the human brain's natural stop signal. Have you ever eaten a massive family-sized bag of Doritos or a huge fast food meal and you feel physically stuffed, like your stomach is painfully distended, but you somehow still feel a gnawing hunger in your mouth?
All the time, man. It's a really gross feeling. You are bursting full, but you are not satiated.
That exact feeling is food goon. They have successfully maximized the wanting through the intense artificial flavor profile while minimizing the actual biological satisfaction by removing all the nutrient density. Your physical body is screaming at you for actual vitamins and nutrients, but you are just feeding it empty engineered calories that only serve to trigger the brain's addiction. You eat constantly, but you were never actually fed.
So whether it is the infinite TikTok scroll or the bottomless bag of heavily processed chips, the underlying mechanism is identical. Keep the consumer locked in the trance. Maximize the endless consumption, minimize the act film.
It really is the defining economic model of our modern era. And honestly, nowhere is this more aggressive, more visible, and arguably more insulting to the consumer than in the modern video game industry.
Which brings us to the absolute core of the source's grief. I'm a lifelong gamer. I have been playing since the Super Nintendo days in my living room, and reading the specific section of the packet, it actually hurt a bit. So the source argues that modern gaming has been completely infected and hollowed out by these dark patterns.
It represents a massive paradigm shift from game design to monetization. In the past, the explicit goal of a studio was to make a game so incredibly fun and complete that you organically tell all your friends to go buy a copy. Now, for so many of these AAA giant studios, the game itself is really just a shiny delivery vehicle for a digital store.
Let's talk about loot boxes first, because they are the most obvious. We mentioned physical slot machines earlier, but loot boxes are literally just slot machines with a shiny fantasy skin slot.
They absolutely are. And the source really digs into the psychological presentation of them too. It's not just a menu where you buy a box and get an item. It's a whole theatrical show. You get the flashing neon lights, you get the booming sound effects of the heavy crate unlocking, you see the ultra rare gold items spinning by on a wheel and almost landing on your cursor before slowly clicking over to a worthless common item.
It's that near-miss psychology, right? You think, oh man, I almost got the legendary glowing sword. If I just buy one more box, I'm definitely going to get it.
Exact. And the source heavily highlights the first hit is free tactic that these games use. Almost every single major multiplayer game with loot boxes gives you a few of them for free in the first hour of playing. They desperately want you to experience that initial dopamine rush of the open without any friction. They hook you on that specific feeling. Then, of course, the free supply quickly dries up. You are left with the lingering craving, and the only possible way to satisfy it is by pulling out your credit card.
And the source brings up the ridiculous legal defense the gaming industry tried to use a few years ago when government started notice. Do you remember the phrase surprise mechanic?
I do, and it would be hilarious if it weren't so deeply predatory. Yes, in a formal parliamentary hearing in the UK, a top executive from EA flatly refused to use the term loot box or gambling under oath. She looked the regulators in the eye and called them surprise mechanics, directly comparing a digital gambling box to buying a chocolate Kinder Egg for a toddler.
Which is just a totally absurd comparison. You do not buy a $2 Kinder Egg hoping the plastic toy inside has a digital resale value of $500 or that it gives you a massive competitive sniper advantage in a digital war zone.
No, it was a blatant, orchestrated attempt to gaslight government regulators. And sadly, for the most part, it actually worked. Meaningful legal regulation on this front has been incredibly slow worldwide. But loot boxes are really just one head of this corporate hydra. The source is arguably even more critical of the concept of digital currency.
Okay, this is my personal biggest pet peeve in modern. Why on earth are there always 5 completely different fake currencies in every single? You have gold gems, V-Buck, glowing shards, energy crystals. It's exhausting.
It is intentional obfuscate. The source actually breaks this down mathematically for it. Let's say a digital character skin costs $20 real and the button just says pay $20. Your brain immediately registers what economists call the pain of paying. You logically evaluate the real world value. You think to yourself, is this fake digital blue shirt really worth $20 I could spend on lunch? Probably not.
Right. I can buy a real pizza for that. But if the button says it costs 2,000 glowing gems.
Exactly. Because you have already previously bought the big pack of gems gem. That actual financial transaction is safely in the past. Spending the gems feels completely disconnected from real money. It just feels like spending Monopoly money. It cleanly detaches the act of consumption from the real-world financial cost. But the real scam here, and the source explicitly labels it a scam, is the bundling tactic.
Oh, yes, the hot dog bun math trick.
Precisely. Let's say there is a really cool limited time item you want in the shop. It costs exactly 1,200 digital credits.
Okay, 1,200.
So you pull up the store page to buy your credits with your credit card. Do they ever sell a flat pack of 1,200 credits?
Oh, never. Literally never. They sell a pack of 1,000 for $10 or a pack of 2,200 for $20.
Exactly. So you literally cannot just buy the item you want. The system forces you to overpay. You are forced to buy the $20, 2,200 credit pack. You buy your 1,200 credit item. Now you have 1,000 credits just sitting left over in your digital wallet.
And that is exactly how they trap you. You look at your screen and think, well, I have $10 worth of credits just sitting there doing nothing. I shouldn't let it go to waste.
But that leftover 1,000 is purposely never quite enough to buy the next top-tier item in the shop. So what do you have to do? You have to buy another pack of credit just to bridge the artificial gap. It is a meticulously mathematically engineered cycle of leftover digital change that ensures your real-world wallet is never safe, but your digital wallet never has quite enough for what you actually desire.
It is so diabolical when you lay it out like that. It's just bad faith business.
Yeah.
And it completely disrespects the player's intelligence on every level.
It really does. And that deep disrespect extends to how these companies treat your actual time, not just your bank account.
Right.
The source goes on a pretty massive rant in the packet about battle passes and daily challenge. They refuse to even call them gameplay. They call them chores.
Yeah, I read that. Log in today and kill 10 wild boars. Play for exactly 30 minutes using a medic character. Run around the map and collect 5 glowing pumpkins before midnight.
These are not fun, engaging gameplay objectives designed by an artist. They're raw engagement metrics designed by an account. They're specifically designed to psychologically force you to turn the game on every single calendar day. The source leans heavily on the term FOMO here, fear of missing out. The game constantly threatens you. It says if you do not log in and do your boring chores this week, you won't unlock level 50 on the battle pass, and you will permanently miss out on this cool flaming helmet.
It effectively turns your leisure activity into a second job. And I have deeply felt this myself. I have begrudgingly logged into games after a long day of actual work games I didn't even want to play in that moment just to clear my daily so I didn't fall behind. It feels like a literal compulsion.
And the source uses a very striking analogy to hammer this. They say this daily login design is like trying to convince an alcoholic to finally quit drinking, but telling him his mandatory daily challenge is to go sit on a stool at his favorite bar for 30 minutes every night. You are intentionally keeping the addict locked in the environment of their addiction. You are systematically normalizing the trance.
And the tragedy is, while all this brilliant psychological engineering is happening in the monetization department, the actual core quality of the game itself grades. This brings us to the gameplay degradation section of the outline. And here is where that term gooner comes back in a very literal, very visual sense.
Ah, yes, what the source bluntly refers to as gooner bait.
Yeah. The source argues that because the underlying gameplay loop in these live service games is so often fundamentally boring, repetitive, or just a chore, developers heavily rely on hypersexualized character models, keep bored people staring.
It's the classic Jingle Keys strategy for toddlers. If your core game loop isn't actually fun, just put a highly detailed female character in a string bikini or a stripper outfit front and center on the main menu. The source makes their stance very clear here, stating sex absolutely sells, but if a massive AAA title has to actively rely on it to maintain player retention, the game itself is highly likely to be fundamentally flawed and mechanical.
Right, it's essentially just using cheap arousal to mask a bad, boring product.
Correct. It keeps the male player base locked in that visual goon state, basically just staring at their waifu, as the community called, rather than engaging with any sort of deep strategic mechanics or a meaningful branching story. The player slowly shifts from being an active participant in an interactive narrative to basically just being a digital collector of pinup.
Now, the source also takes a massive swing at the complete opposite side of the cultural pen. And I want to be extremely clear for our listeners. Right now, we are strictly reporting the source's perspective and arguments on this topic. They have a massive bone to pick with what they refer to as woke or DEI inclusions in modern.
Yes, and it is very important to parse the specific nature of their critique here. The source isn't necessarily trying to write a sweeping political manifesto. They frame it as a strict quality control issue. Their core argument is that when writing rooms prioritize the message, meaning modern political correctness, corporate diversity checklists, or heavy-handed social commentary over the organic internal logic of the fantasy world they are building, the entire story just completely collapsed.
The exact phrase they used in the text was nonsense plot.
Right. The argument is that you end up with fantasy characters who simply do not act or speak like real human beings. Instead, they act like stilted modern mouthpieces for the lead writer's personal political. Or you get historical settings that just don't make any logical or structural sense given the established lore. The source views this as basically just another side of the exact same corrupt. Just as the Gooner bait sacrifices artistic dignity for cheap, horny engagement, the woke content sacrifices deep narrative coherence for cheap political applause on social media. Ultimately, both extremes result in a vastly inferior.
Yeah, it's a total loss of immersion either way. Whether I am being aggressively sold a glowing loot box, whether I'm being manipulated by a character in a bikini, or whether I'm being bluntly lectured about modern 2024 politics in the middle of a medieval dragon fantasy game, I am violently being pulled out of the immersion.
Exactly. You are reminded that you are consuming a corporate product. And honestly, nothing pulls you out of a game's world quite like excessive hand-holding. This was the section of the packet that genuinely made me laugh out loud in my office because it is just so absurdly true of modern design. The source calls it the literal retard proofing of video games.
It is incredibly harsh phrasing, but man, I instantly get the sheer frustration behind it. Every gamer knows exactly that.
The glowing yellow paint slapped on every climbable ledge, the constant unskippable pop-up tutorials 10 hours into a campaign. The source actually references a highly popular parody video made by a YouTuber named Dexter Manning about the classic Nintendo 64 game, The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time.
Oh, I have actually seen this exact video. It is so painfully accurate.
For any listeners who haven't seen it, Ocarina of Time is an absolute masterpiece of classic design. You explore a vast world, you get terribly lost. You have to organically figure out the puzzles yourself. But in this parody video, Manning brilliantly imagines what it would look like if a major modern AAA studio remade it today. So Link walks into a simple stone room. His fairy companion, Navi, immediately freezes the entire game. A giant text box pops up saying, "Link, look a skeleton." The camera forcibly yanks control away from the player to slowly zoom in on a completely obvious skeleton standing in the middle of the empty room. Then it says, press the A button to attack the skeleton. You press it once and it screams, "Great job, Link, you defeated the evil skeleton."
It literally treats the grown adult player like they have a severe traumatic brain injury.
It completely removes all sense of player age. There is absolutely no joy of discovery anymore. There's only blind obedience to on-screen instruction. The source argues that massive developers do this because they are absolutely terrified of a casual player getting stuck on a puzzle for even 5 seconds, putting the controller down, and churning, which is the industry term for permanently quitting the game. So out of fear, they actively turn what should be an open world into a narrow padded hallway where you physically cannot fail, but ironically, you also cannot ever truly succeed or feel smart.
And this design philosophy perfectly creates that brain-dead zombie feeling we were talking about earlier. You are just mindlessly pressing the glowing X button exactly when the flashing screen tells you aren't problem-solving. You aren't.
Which perfectly brings us to the massive case study in the packet. The source argues that one specific legendary company exemplifies this tragic fall from grace more than any other in the industry today: Square Enix, the historical creators of the Final Fantasy franchise.
This entire section was just a brutal, unrelenting takedown. The source essentially frames the modern era of Square Enix as a corporate tragedy.
A tragedy of a completely lost corporate identity. The source traces the timeline of this decline directly back to the sudden departure of Hironobu Sakaguchi, who was the original creator and visionary of the series about 20 years ago.
What the author refers to as the gold standard era of the company. We're talking Final Fantasy 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. Oh wait, I think they also mentioned Chrono Trigger in there too as part of that golden run.
Yes, they did. These were the games that literally defined the entire RPG medium globally. They were massive, complete experiences on a single disc. They were deeply artistic. They told sweeping, emotional, profound stories. Since Sakaguchi left the building, the source aggressively argues that the entire company has essentially just been lazily coasting on established brand recognition and nostalgia. They point to the modern mainline entries like Final Fantasy 13, 15, and 16 as being incredibly flashy looking but totally hollow underneath.
But the real venom, the absolute most anger in this document is heavily reserved for the massive Final Fantasy VII, specifically the newest entry. Now, we have to understand Final Fantasy VII from 1997 is genuinely sacred ground for a massive generation. Remaking it is culturally akin to someone trying to remake the original Star Wars. Absolutely have to.
And according to the heavy arguments in the source material, they got it disastrously wrong on almost every front. The very first major critique they launch is about the core pacing. The original PS1 game is a very tight incredibly punchy narrative adventure. This modern remake project arbitrarily takes that exact same story and mercilessly stretches it out into 3 separate, massive, full-price releases.
It's the ultimate padding complaint.
Think about the math of it. Imagine taking a perfectly paced 2-hour blockbuster movie and a studio forcing the director to turn it into a 10-hour television series without being allowed to add any meaningful new central plot. You are mathematically forced to fill the dead time. So you get what the source derisively calls nonsense filler, endless repetitive fetch quests, mind-numbing minigame, NPCs telling you to go find their lost domestic cats in the slums, go fix this broken radio tower in the desert. It completely dilutes the dramatic urgency of the main story. Your party of heroes is supposedly trying to urgently save the dying planet from a world-ending meteor, but you somehow spend 4 real-world hours playing a convoluted digital card game on a luxury cruise ship.
And speaking of that cruise ship, the character changes they made. This felt incredibly personal for the author of the source material, specifically regarding how they handled the character Red the 13th.
Red the 13th is such a fascinatingly complex character in the original 1997 narrative. Physically, he looks like a giant, glowing lion-wolf beast, but internally, he is a proud tribal warrior. He's wise, he is deeply stoic, and he carries this immense tragic backstory. He acts as the grounded old soul of the chaotic mercenary group.
And how does he act in Rebirth?
Well, the source vividly describes a highly controversial sequence on that luxury cruise ship where Red the 30th is, he's basically acting like a cartoon puppy. He is awkwardly walking upright on his hind legs, dressed in a silly fitted sailor uniform, desperately trying to casually enter a card tournament. He's constantly cracking wacky jokes. He's thanking the player character profusely and saying things like, "We are really, really going to miss you," with this bizarrely insecure, desperate, clingy energy.
The source literally just called the entire sequence completely cringe.
Because it completely strips a proud, dignified warrior of his gravitas and turns him into a cheap comedic mascot. It totally infantilizes him for cheap laughs. And then on the other end of the spectrum, there is how they handled Sephiroth, the main villain.
Yes, the demon lord goth mommy critique.
Right. In the original classic game, Sephiroth, it's absolutely terrifying, precisely because he is almost entirely absent for the first half of the journey. You don't see him. You only constantly see the horrifying aftermath of his extreme violence. You see the massive blood trails smeared across corporate headquarters. You see the giant dead serpent impaled on a tree. But you rarely ever see the man himself. He's a looming, terrifying mist. But in this new remake project, he is quite literally everywhere all the time. Constantly pops up out of thin air just to whisper cryptic, edgy nonsense directly into the protagonist Cloud's ear.
He's basically just nagging you the whole game.
He fundamentally transforms from an object of deep existential fear into an object of weird parasocial obsession. The source argues that the corporate developers clearly looked at the data and saw that modern fans love the visual design of Sephiroth. So the mandate was put him on the screen as much as humanly possible to constantly trigger that cheap recognition dopamine in the fan. But in doing so, they fundamentally ruined the psychological narrative tension. They took a brilliant slasher horror villain and essentially turned him into a brooding fan service boy.
And the insane way they handled the spoiler. The source angrily points out that the remake basically violently spoils its own massive plot twists almost immediately.
Because the game fundamentally assumes you have already played the 1997 original. It completely removes the slow burn mystery for any brand new player. And it actively annoys the old veteran players by injecting all this convoluted multiverse alternate timeline nonsense into a previously tight story. The source emphatically calls the entire structural direction of the trilogy a giant middle finger to the core audience. It blatantly prioritizes extracting maximum money, forcing fans to buy 3 separate $70 games instead of 1, while sacrificing the ability to tell a coherent standalone story.
Okay, so stepping back, we currently have a gaming landscape dominated by psychological addiction engineering, predatory loot boxes, battle pass chores, and once beloved legacy franchises seemingly being hollowed out and padded for max profit. It genuinely feels pretty bleak. If I'm a person who just genuinely loves playing games, is there actually anything good left up?
Well, this is exactly where the source makes its major optimistic pivot, because they firmly argue that this massive goonification of the entire AAA industry has accidentally created a massive market vacuum. Millions of older players are absolutely starving for genuine, complete quality. And that intense starvation has allowed a brand new unknown challenger to confidently enter the ring and completely disrupt the narrative.
We're talking about the game Expedition 33?
Yes, its full title is Claire Obscure Expedition 33.
Now, I will be totally honest, I had never even heard of this specific game before reading the packet this morning, but the source is absolutely aggressively hyping it up as an easy lock for Game of the Year in 2025. And the financial context here is really important to note. This is absolutely not a giant billion-dollar mega studio making this right.
No, not at all. This game is being developed by Sunfall Interact. They are a relatively small, independent French studio. The reported total budget for this entire game was less than $10 million. Now, to put that in perspective, in the modern world of Final Fantasy and Call of Duty, where budgets regularly balloon past $300 million, $10 million is absolute pocket. It is a shoestring indie budget.
So how on earth are they supposedly beating these massive corporate giants at their own genre?
By confidently doing the exact opposite of absolutely everything we just discussed for the last half hour. The source passionately crowns it the ultimate anti-gooner game. Let's look at the core business model first. Absolutely no predatory microtransactions. There is no confusing seasonal battle pass. There is no multi-year content roadmap. You pay one flat price, you buy the complete game, and you permanently own the game.
And didn't they already announce they're releasing a massive narrative content update entirely for...
Yes, they did. There is no dirty trick where they hold back the true ending and say, pay us $20 for the DLC to see the rest of the story. It is a complete return to baseline consumer respect.
And what about the actual in-game design philosophy? Does it treat you like a baby?
No hand-holding whatsoever. This is a massive selling point. The game's narrative revolves around a mysterious entity known as the Paintress. Once a year, she paints a specific number on giant monoliths in the sky, and if you happen to be that exact age, you instantly vanish from existence. It's a very dark, incredibly surreal, gripping world, and the game completely expects you as an adult to independently navigate. There is absolutely no glowing yellow paint smeared on the cliffs. There is no giant flashing waypoint arrow floating on your screen. You actually have to stop running and visually analyze the environment around you. You have to look at how the lighting falls on a ruin or observe the moss growing on a specific wall to figure out the correct path forward.
It actually inherently trusts the player.
It deeply respects your baseline intelligence. It operates on the radical assumption that you have a functioning brain and that you actually want to use it to solve problems. And then there's the narrative itself. The source just completely raves about the quality of the script writing here.
Yeah, there was a really fascinating detail in the document about the studio's head writer, Jennifer Sedberg.
Yes, this is incredible. She was reportedly a published traditional novelist before this project, not a veteran game writer. In fact, she openly admitted she hadn't really played many modern video games at all before taking the job.
See, usually in hardcore gaming circles, people would immediately point to that as a massive red flag. They'd say, oh, she doesn't know the medium, she's going to ruin it.
Right. But the source argues that in this specific case, it was actually her ultimate superpower because she didn't know all the tired industry tropes. She hadn't been poisoned by the unwritten rules of modern video game plotting. She just sat down and fiercely focused on writing genuinely compelling, complex characters. She wrote real flawed people reacting to a deeply desperate apocalyptic situation. She wasn't handed a corporate mandate to write dialogue that would help sell cosmetic skins. She was just given the singular goal to make the audience cry.
And the source emphasizes that these characters do not feel like cheap anime tropes or stilted political mouthpieces. They just feel like traumatized survivors trying to live another day.
And that deep emotional resonance is exactly why the game is succeeding so wildly in early preview. It definitively proves to the industry that you absolutely do not need $300 million hyper-realistic graphics or incredibly predatory slot machine mechanics to capture an audience. If a studio just makes a game with genuine human heart, with deep respect for the player's time, and with a solid, definitive beginning, middle, and end, millions of exhausted gamers will happily show up and pay.
It really operates as a massive middle finger to the established industry. It's them saying, we can do exactly what you do, but infinitely better with actual soul and with a tiny fraction of your bloated butt.
The author of the source highlights a quote regarding this game philosophy. For those who come after, learn from the ones who came before. It is a powerful call for a complete return to the traditional artistic roots of the medium.
Okay, so we have successfully diagnosed the macros, right? Gooner. And we have identified a clear cure existing in the commercial market with games like Expedition. But let's bring this all the way down to earth. Let's talk about the practical cure for individual listeners sitting at home right now. If I am listening to this and slowly realizing, oh my God, I am in the box, I am a stage 1 gooner, endlessly scrolling at midnight, how do I actually start breaking out of the cave?
The source, thankfully, provides a very concrete, multi-step battle plan at the end of the document. And it heavily starts with a fundamental mindset shift. You have to actively acknowledge the end.
This directly ties back into not just blindly blaming yourself for being lazy, right?
Precisely. If you just sit on your couch and think you are simply a lazy person, or that you intrinsically have zero willpower, you're guaranteed to fail. You need to fully understand that you are currently locked in a digital cage mat against a billion-dollar supercomputer. The social media algorithm mathematically knows the precise chemistry of your brain far better than you do. It has A/B tested literally millions of minute variations of that video feed on millions of people to violently find the exact one that perfectly hooks your specific demographic.
So don't bring a butter knife to a drone fight. You need a real tactical strategy.
Exactly. Step 2 of the plan is learning to actively identify the physical signs of the trance in real time. You need to notice the time blindness when you look at the clock and realize you just lost 3 hours to the couch. You need to notice the escalating desires.
When you start needing crazier, more extreme, or more hyper-stimulating videos just to feel a baseline level of mild entertainment.
Exactly. If you can objectively spot these signs in your own behavior, you have to force yourself to verbally acknowledge. You have to say out loud, I am currently in the trance, and then you physically stop.
Now, step 3 is the part where I heavily pushed back when I first read the outline. The physical intervention, and specifically the very first rule in bold print, which is clean your room.
I completely know how it sounds.
It genuinely sounds like a nagging parent or a 1950s self-help guru. You know, clean your bedroom, make your bed, and magically you won't be addicted to TikTok algorithm anymore. Come on.
Yeah.
Is there actually any hard scientific data backing this up, or is this just heavy-handed moralizing from the author?
I promise you there is actual hard biology at work here. The source isn't just peddling vague self-help metaphors about being an organized person. They are specifically talking about the biological mechanics of systemic inflammation.
Okay, break that down for me. How does a messy room cause inflammation?
If your immediate physical environment, your bedroom, your office, is deeply dirty and filled with accumulating dust, microscopic mold spores, pet dander, or rotting old food wrappers, your body's immune system is constantly actively fighting a low-grade war. As a defense mechanism, it constantly releases proteins called cytokines into your bloodstream. These are primary inflammatory markers.
Can't follow.
Now, when your entire physical body, including your brain, is suffering from chronic low-grade inflammation, your executive function mathematically drops. Your prefrontal cortex, which is the specific part of your brain that handles complex decision-making and willpower, the part that clearly says, no, I really shouldn't scroll right now, I need to finish my work, it literally gets biologically weaker. You experience what people casually call brain fog. You feel physically and mentally lethargic.
And when you feel that heavy lethargy set in,
Your brain naturally seeks out the absolute path of least resistance to get at dopamine, which means you instantly grab your phone and scroll. The source makes a profound argument that our perpetually dirty environment physically and biologically degrades your raw capability to resist digital addiction. So doing the literal physical chores, vacuuming the rug, washing your dirty bed sheets with hot water, buying a high-quality HEPA air purifier for the corner of the room, these are not just chores to make the room look pretty. They are literal tactical physiological upgrades to your brain's hardware.
you are literally clearing the biological fog out of your brain so your prefrontal cortex can actually boot up and make a conscious.
Precisely. You are giving your willpower a fighting chance. And it's the exact same biological logic behind their specific cardio advice.
Right, the mandate to run 1 to 2 miles 5 days a week.
It is entirely about forcing aggressive blood flow to the brain. The physical sedentary trance of sitting still in a chair for 10 hours heavily reinforces the mental digital trance. If you force your body to move vigorously, you violently break that feedback loop. You send a massive biological signal to your nervous system that you are now an active participant in reality, not a passive consumer.
Okay, I am actually totally sold on the vacuuming and the running now. Science makes sense. Now, what about the final step, the psychological intervention? Source explicitly says you have to curate.
This is basic addiction, man. You have to aggressively remove the environmental triggers. If you are seriously trying to quit eating refined sugar, you do not leave a massive glass bowl of M&Ms sitting directly on your work desk. You have to relentlessly unfollow all the thirst traps. Unfollow the aggressive political rage bait account. Unfollow the specific influencers whose entire business model is designed to make you feel inadequate, poor, or angry.
But the source makes a huge point here that you can't just delete the apps and sit in a silent room. You absolutely have to replace the behavior.
Yes, the replacement strat. The human brain completely despises a vacuum. If you just forcefully rip the phone away and sit there staring at a blank white wall, the craving will eventually overpower you and you will go right back to the phone. You absolutely need to actively replace the cheap, shallow dopamine of endless anticipation with the deep chemical satisfaction of genuine achievement.
Which perfectly circles us all the way back around to the concept of playing a true.
Yes, you need to engage in what philosophers call a finite, a game like Expedition 33, or maybe the new Black Myth Wukong, or honestly, even just sitting down for a focused game of physical chess, something that actively requires your complete mental focus, something that genuinely challenges your problem-solving skills, and most importantly of all, something that actually ends.
Right, you desperately want to cultivate that profound feeling of, I did it, I conquered it, not just the endless hollow feeling of, I'm currently doing it.
Exact. You want to slowly and deliberately retrain your fried dopamine to heavily value the deep, lasting satisfaction, completely finishing a complex task, rather than the frantic, cheap anxiety of anticipating the next random digit. You fundamentally want to transition your mind from gooning, which is endless, unfulfilled wanting, to actually living, which is doing and eventually finish.
It is entirely about reclaiming your own personal, actively deciding for yourself what exact media you want to, rather than just opening your mouth and having a corporate algorithm militia via.
It genuinely is the only viable path to long-term psychological survival in the modern attention.
And this has been an incredibly intense deep dive. I definitely feel like I need to go wash my bed sheets immediately after we sign off here.
It is universally a very good place to start the problem.
But in all seriousness, it's a structural framework that truly makes terrifying sense of a lot of the vague modern malaise we all feel. We are quite literally being mathematically engineered by massive corporations to be constantly dissatisfied with our lives.
We absolutely are. The data supports it.
So to neatly wrap this whole crazy topic up, gooning absolutely isn't just an edgy internet meme anymore. It is a highly sophisticated macroeconomic strategy of maximized wanting and minimized satisfaction. It's B.F. Skinner's starving pigeons pecking at buttons. It's the manipulative surprise mechanics secretly buried inside your favorite video games. And it's literally the dust and mold in your dirty bedroom, keeping your brain too foggy to effectively fight back.
But the crucial takeaway is that the door to the cage is actually unlocked. You just have to wake up and realize you were sitting inside the cage.
Exactly. Now, before we go, I really want to leave everyone listening with the final, incredibly provocative thought taken directly from the source. A bit of a chilling concept. The source darkly suggests that we are currently effectively in the middle of a war, a brutal war for our collective. And as average individuals, we are currently up against banks of artificial supercomputers, teams of Ivy League neuroscientists, and literally unlimited corporate tech budgets. And the executives running these massive systems, the exact people happily turning us into mindless degenerates for profit. They likely won't even be alive long enough to see the devastating downstream cultural consequences of what they've built. They are purely just trying to hit their immediate quarterly stock target.
It raises the absolute ultimate philosophical question of our era. Is individual personal responsibility actually enough to fight this anymore? Or is the underlying corporate system so fundamentally mathematically broken that we are all inevitably doomed to just be the pigeon in the box unless we collectively decide to completely smash the machine?
And on a slightly lighter but arguably equally important note for your own personal life, when was the exact last time you felt truly deeply satisfied by the media you consumed rather than just feeling mindlessly occupied?
If you genuinely cannot remember the answer to that question, it might finally be time to change the game you're playing.
Thanks for diving deep with us today, everyone. Seriously, go clean your room.
See you all next time.